Pests can be a really big issue in vegetable gardens, although the specific pests that we have to deal with and the damage that they can cause can vary enormously with the climate and the ecosystem that we are growing in. Dealing with pests can require a lot of time and resources, and the methods that we use to eliminate them, or at least to reduce their impact, can have some problematic side effects. In my family scale gardens, I avoid pesticide sprays and poisons, both the conventional kind and those that are used within organic operations, as there always seems to be a risk of collateral damage with these types of approaches. Depending on the pest, I prefer to use barriers, traps, and in some cases I hunt them down and kill them. But I also like to work towards the possibility that predators of some of these pests could be part of the ecosystem within and around the gardens, and can help to reduce the damage caused to my vegetables. I've had some success with this approach, but a lot seems to depend on finding an appropriate balance between the population of the pest and the populations of the potential predators. Slugs are one of the main pests in my vegetable gardens, and they can cause a lot of damage in some seasons. I've tried a lot of different ways to deal with them, or at least to reduce their numbers, and for the most part these days I use various methods to kill them myself. There are some things that eat slugs that I could introduce, especially ducks. But they're not really appropriate in the context of my gardens, as it's an open site that is shared with a lot of other people. Here in Ireland, hedgehogs are one of the main natural predators of slugs, and we've created quite a good habitat for hedgehogs around these gardens, but it's hard to know if they're around as they are nocturnal creatures. A few years ago I caught a large, healthy hedgehog in a live trap that I had set up to catch whatever was eating my broccoli plants, and it was good to know that at least one of these slug-eating garden companions was hanging around. But over the last few years I've suspected that it probably had moved on, and earlier this year there were loads of slugs and small snails in my gardens. I had let my guard down, and I hadn't been making as many slug-killing patrols in my gardens as I used to, and I figured that there weren't any hedgehogs around to help. But more recently, I've caught several videos of a healthy hedgehog patrolling the gardens, and I've noticed fewer slugs. If I had used poison to kill the slugs in the past, then I likely would have killed this hedgehog as well. But I also suspect that if I had been much more successful at keeping the population of slugs down in my gardens by other means, then this hedgehog wouldn't have taken up residence. And it also makes me wonder how many slugs it takes to keep a hedgehog happy and well fed enough to stick around, and if I'd be willing to tolerate that number of slugs in and around my gardens. I've also struggled with aphids in the gardens, especially in the protected microclimate of the polytunnel, where they can seriously stun some plants. There's a number of different methods that I've used to deal with this pest in the past, including rubbing them with my fingers to kill them, washing them off with a hose, or spraying them with soapy water. But I've also been encouraging ladybird or ladybug populations, who are great natural predators of aphids, especially during the larval phase, where they can apparently eat an enormous number of aphids. Within the diverse plantings in the polytunnel garden, there always seems to be a number of ladybirds around, and when I find one in the landscape outside, I often bring it into the polytunnel to boost the population. But I've realized over the years that if I want to rely on ladybirds to kill the aphids, then I need to give them time to do the job, and to not react to the presence of a lot of aphids in the gardens earlier in the season. Apparently ladybirds need to eat a lot of aphids in order to lay their eggs, or at least they won't lay them unless there's going to be a plentiful food supply available when the larvae hatch. But if I use some other method to get rid of the aphids while the eggs are maturing, then the larvae may hatch into an environment where there just isn't enough for them to eat, meaning that fewer of them will survive or stick around long enough to reproduce again. In order to maintain a healthy population of ladybirds to deal with the aphids, I actually need to tolerate a certain amount of aphids in the gardens, and to accept that they have a faster reproductive rate than their predators. I need to be patient enough to let the ladybird life cycle catch up to the growing population of aphids. I do keep an eye on things, but these days I try not to worry when I start to see aphids in this garden, and instead I try to grow healthier plants that can better tolerate the presence of aphids. Rats are another very common companion in gardens and farms here in Ireland, as they are in many places in the world. There are some health risks associated with rats being around, and some people find this really problematic, and other people are simply really freaked out whenever they see them. Personally, I think rats are quite amazing animals, and I don't mind them being around, and I've come to accept that with lots of places for them to live in the natural landscape and a diversity of things for them to eat, they will always have a background presence. I do get concerned whenever their population seems to be getting too high, but my biggest concern is when they start to eat crops in the gardens, including eating the sunflower microgreen seeds, damaging a lot of tomatoes, and even eating the carrots that are still in the ground. Over the years, I've used several different methods to control the rat population, though I have stayed away from poisons, and have been largely successful at keeping their numbers down. This year, I thought I would experiment with trying to leave space to see what impact the natural predators of rats would have. I was hoping that if I stood back and waited, the local populations of foxes, owls, and a few other species of birds would step in, and have been trying to encourage a few of the neighborhood cats to hang around the gardens more often. Over the past few months, I have set up a wildlife camera in a number of different locations to see what kind of activity there might be of both rats and their potential predators. So far, I've observed 4 different cats making the rounds of my gardens, which I thought would deal with the rat population quite effectively. No doubt they are killing a few rats, but I did get footage of one of the cats sitting on top of my compost pile eating some of the scraps, and right beside it there was a rat quite contentedly doing the same thing. So I became less convinced that the cats were helping out with this, especially as the rat population seemed to be increasing. I haven't seen any signs of owls, though I know that there's at least 2 nesting families in the area. And unfortunately, any of the other birds of prey that come close to the gardens tend to be chased off by the large population of jackdaws and rooks that nest nearby. So for a while, I was concerned that my little experiment was not going to work, and I began to take a much more active role in culling the population of rats. But then, more recently, I realized that a fox had stepped in to help. I first became aware that a fox was making the rounds of my gardens when it picked up my wildlife camera from inside the polytunnel and ran off with it, probably thinking that it was an egg. I've since caught other videos of this fox at night, and in the past few weeks it's been a regular daytime visitor, even coming around when I was working in the gardens, and I've even witnessed it catching a rat. Now that I know that there's a fox in the area, it will be interesting to see how effective it is at keeping the rat population down, and I wonder how many rats it takes to keep a fox happy enough to stick around. It seems that one of the key issues with relying on natural predators is tolerance and patience, which can be tough with some potentially problematic pests. If I'm going to rely on there being a hedgehog in the vicinity to help with the slugs in my gardens, then I need to have slugs in my gardens, and probably more than a few of them. But even a few slugs can be a problem, especially with young crops, which can be seriously damaged by slugs in a very short period of time. I could change the approach and work to clear slugs out of only some areas of the gardens, and to rely on traps and barriers to protect the plants that are most vulnerable, and to try to be less concerned but watchful in other parts of the gardens. But I'm not so sure if I want to take this risk. I'm a bit more comfortable with the interplay between the rising and falling populations of aphids versus ladybirds, especially as I get better at avoiding stress in the plants that I'm growing. I still try to be observant, and occasionally I rub aphids off of some of the plants in the spring, but for the most part I let the ladybirds do the work of keeping the population down, and I always try to have a diverse range of habitat for these predators to live in the polytunnel. With the possible buildup of rat populations, I'm less certain, as I don't know how much I can rely on the fox or other predators, or what I could be doing to assist or accommodate them. I've also been quite frustrated with the damage to crops that even a few rats could do, and I know that some of my neighbors are less tolerant than I would be. But on the other hand, we now have a really healthy fox hanging around, and I doubt that would have happened if I had maintained my usual role of keeping the rat population under control. In all of these experiences, I've come to see the importance of trying to better understand ecosystem dynamics, especially the balance of populations between pests and potential predators, and there's so much more to learn about all of this. The weather, seasonal fluctuations, and the availability of other food sources no doubt has been an issue, and it'll be interesting to see if similar patterns of populations occur again in the next few seasons. Providing hedgerows and wildlife corridors can be of benefit to creatures like the hedgehog, but the same habitat can provide perfect cover and habitat for the rats. An open area around the gardens and the compost piles might make it easier for the predators to catch the rats, but it might make life more difficult for the hedgehog. And as the ecosystem evolves and the biodiversity increases, there's always a possibility of things preying on the predators, even with the ladybirds. I suspect that the family of wrens that have been regular visitors into my polytunnel garden were eating a lot of the ladybird larvae as well as the other insects. It's difficult to understand my role within all of this, but I've come to believe that in these cases, if I intervene too much, then I may need to always take on the responsibility of dealing with these pests. This complex interplay between lots of different species in an evolving landscape will no doubt change in the future, and the risk of losing crops will always be there. For now, I'm focusing on developing long-term resilience and understanding, and not just on the short-term gain of the crops that I'm currently growing. But this requires a certain amount of excess capacity and abundance, which I currently have, in which I'm able to tolerate the loss of some crops while I figure it all out.